Hello, it's Brandon Laws, host of Transform Your Workplace. This episode is brought to you by Xenium HR. If you're looking to grow as a leader, check out Xenium's learning and development programs, whether it's virtual workshops, on-demand courses, leadership cohorts, or even custom training for your organization. Xenium helps leaders level up. Okay, now let me ask you something. Have you ever been so busy that you accidentally ate cat food for dinner? Yeah. Well, today's guest is Peggy Sullivan, and she literally did that. And it was one of her wake up calls that led her to write the book Beyond Busyness: How to Achieve More by Doing Less. I'm so excited to share this conversation with you because let's face it, we're all juggling way too much these days. And Peggy's perspective on time poverty and how to bust out of that cycle is a game changer. In this episode, you'll hear Peggy's 3-step busy busting process that's practical and powerful and includes subtraction, mojo making, and values vibing. We also talk about why busyness is not a badge of honor, how it kills productivity and creativity, and why doing less can actually lead to greater impact, both at work and in your personal life. You're going to love Peggy's energy. She's real, she's fun, and she's got the data to back this all up. Before we jump into the conversation, do me a quick favor. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, rate and review the podcast, and of course, hit that subscribe button so you get the episodes every Tuesday and you don't miss an episode. Your support helps us continue bringing conversations like this one that help transform workplaces for the better. All right, here's my conversation with Peggy Sullivan. Enjoy. Peggy, it's a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
You are quite welcome. My pleasure.
Your book just came out last week, and this is your third book, I think you wrote total. So this book is Beyond Busyness: How to Achieve More by Doing Less. And I mean, this totally speaks to me because I'm sure you've talked to other people. I have a very busy workload, and I'm always trying to find ways of doing things more efficiently to not work as hard. So let's get into the book. Seth Godin called your book a wake-up call to get back to living. What were some of those wake-up calls for you? Because I know you talk about it in the book, some of those things that happened in your life where you were stuck in time poverty, as you call it. You decided to make some changes. What were some of those things?
Yeah, I actually had a series of wake up calls. And I think the one wake up call that really resonated for me was when I came home from work one day and I was exhausted, like usual, another 12-hour day. I look in the cupboard. I had a young child, but I was not married at the time. So his father had him. And so I was scavenging anything to eat, anything edible. And I landed on this bag of pistachio nuts and I chomped them down. And my poor cat Dazzle, he's like, feed me, I'm hungry too. And so I threw some kibbles into his dish. I went on the couch. I fell asleep and I woke up. My cat is throwing up pistachio nuts. And I looked down and I realized I just ate cat food for dinner and I didn't even realize it. And I remember thinking to myself, these nuts are stale, they're salty. But I was on autopilot. And so many of the wake up calls would be I'd wake up and then I'd go back to the same behavior. And it became crystal clear to me as I was writing this book that there was no good recipe for how do we get off the hamster wheel? What do we do and in what order and what things really help us live life of purpose and of value where we can be super productive at work and really help support our corporate goals, but also, have a life that we love and has time for the things we love. So about 10 years ago, I went on a mission to try to figure out what this process looked like. I had been doing a lot of research. I started a nonprofit and I kept on asking everybody in the world, literally thousands and thousands of people, what's your biggest challenge? What keeps you up at night? And they kept on saying, I don't have time for what's important. And What I ended up calling it at that time was busyness, but what I didn't know was that everybody loves being busy. So when you say I'm busy, people think it's a status symbol, it's a sign of importance. But busyness rarely equates to success. It rarely equates to productivity. It rarely equates to quality of life. And so I started testing different things to understand how I could get my corporate environment to that place and as well as my personal life. And so really the process that I developed is great for leaders and it's great for organizations. I worked in healthcare for a long time, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare. I tested the processes out on thousands of people, Google, and just honed them in until I got to the end of it where people could say, wow, I got back 5 hours in my work week, and what a beautiful thing that is.
You mentioned the phrase time poverty throughout the book several times. What does that mean in the context of busyness? Why you call it time poverty?
Well, as I discovered, people love being busy and they think that being busy is a good thing. But having time poverty, not having time for what's important, and being in a state of poverty is usually not something anybody wants. So when you have time poverty and you don't have time for what's most important, you get to your end of your day wondering, where did the day go? Why didn't I have time for this, my biggest priority of the day at work? I didn't get to that. I just got interrupted, took calls, did email. I just had busy work all day. And so it occurred to me that busy really wasn't the word. The words were time poverty. And really the words were, how do we achieve more by doing less? How can we get rid of those low value activities that chew up our energy and our resources? And so that's what the book is about. It's about what I call my three-step busy busting process. And it's a funny book. It's a fun book. I love to have fun. I always tell people I am one big hot mess. And so I tell all of my stories about being a hot mess and getting into trouble with being a hot mess because, this is life today. It moves so fast and people need to know it's okay to be a hot mess. But I use these tools all the time. They change my life. I tell people I am a busyness addict in recovery. And every day I work on my recovery. Some days where I'm looking at my goals and the things I want, and I get into a busy place. And then I take a step back and I remember the things that I am trying to share in the world and the things that really help me be more strategic and more aligned. And every time I use those tools and I go back to it, I end my day saying, today was a really good day.
I love that this book is so personal. I mean, it's well thought out and researched too, but you make it about yourself as well, and you share some of the problems that you've had. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same right now. So throughout your book, there's tons of tools and things like that. You have the business barometer assessment. So of course, I went and took it. And could you guess what I scored?
Most
Just a
people
wild
do
guess.
not do well on the score. Most people do anywhere from 40 to 53. That is the average. But if you take a look at some of the suggestions and you take micro steps towards them, what's really fun is you improve very quickly.
Yeah, you would be right. I scored a 46 and I recognize it. I'm self aware enough to know that, like, some of the suggestions that you offered, I will take those into account for sure. Like, just knowing what my score is, could you just guess some of the things I need to work on and maybe suggest a few things for me?
Sure. Typically, people overstuff their schedules and they have no time to actually do the work that needs to be done. So they wonder why they get to the end of the day. We're really big on 24/7 communication. So we're always looking at email. I had one person who looked at email 106 times a day. Well, how can you get anything done when you're looking at email that often? And so it's really about identifying that you don't need to be doing certain things as frequently, but you do need to block out time for the things that are most important, need to pivot. and keep on redefining your priorities because our world changes, and what was important today often may change tomorrow morning if you wake up and your kids are sick, or somebody in your department is out on leave. All of a sudden you're doing different things, and so it's really about finding time for what is most valuable, what is most important, what will deliver a return on investment.
You highlighted that you ate cat food and recognized that, like, I might be a little too busy and just not, maybe burned out, just not in the right state of mind. And for others, it may be like just absolutely missing a meeting or sleeping in accidentally. What are some other negative impacts that you've seen, both at the individual level, but also in the organizational level, when busyness becomes like a norm within a person or a culture?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at loneliness and the epidemic that loneliness has in the country, when we're busy, we tend to shut people out and we don't make time for connection. And that has all sorts of health implications. The Surgeon General came out and said loneliness is like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's the impact it has on your health. And so loneliness is definitely a byproduct. Lack of productivity is definitely a byproduct. You tend to do a lot of things not well. Quality tends to really deteriorate. You lose your energy, your creativity, your zest for life, your positivity. The list goes on and on. And that's why I love data, because if you really roll up your sleeves and look at the data shows that busy isn't better. That actually, when we multitask, it takes us three times as longer and we have three times as many mistakes. And, we set ourselves up for chronic disease and brain fog and just all those things, lack of ability to problem solve. It's just a lot of consequences of you're not a good leader when you're over the top busy. You can't empower and give your people the tools that they need and they support that they need to be a good leader. And even values, I think we have gotten away from a society that is truly value driven, and everybody believes that their values are important. So how do you align your values in the workplace and live a life that just really floats you and excites you and makes you feel good about the contributions you're making in the world and the things that you're doing? And that's why values is such a big part of the busy busting process that I teach, because most people will raise their hand and say values are so important, but most people don't have a process to align their values with their schedule and with how they make decisions. And so once again, the book is just so research driven about what works and how we can escape time poverty.
I mean, that's why I do love your book so much. Is it's simple. The busy busting process is, it's easy to digest and understand. And if we can apply some of those changes that you talk about, it seems like we would probably have a business barometer score that's much higher than a 46 like I just got. But let's back up a little bit. The busy busting process, can you just at a high level share what those components are? And we'll get into some of those in a few.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of simplicity and that small things can have huge impact. And so the process is very simple. It's three steps. Step one in the process is subtraction, and that is the art of eliminating low value activities. Step two is what I call mojo making. My first book was about the neuroscience of happiness. And it's pretty amazing what happens to your brain and your body and your health when you're happy. And we view happiness as a destination of thing. We don't create happiness for ourselves, these little micro moments. And then the third step is what I call values vibing. And it's about, how do you align your values with your day to day decisions? So you get to the end of the day saying, I had time to connect with the people I love, the people at work. I had time to learn something new today. I had time to really focus on things that are bottom line oriented and performance within my company. It's just the values vibing part is just such a simple way to align your values with your day-to-day decisions.
Let's start with the subtraction. I imagine there's a lot of pushback from people saying, well, everything's important. And the reason I'm so busy is a heavy workload. But my guess is that you would say there's still a lot of low value tasks that you can get rid of. Is there a method or an exercise that any individual can go through to identify and eliminate some of those low value tasks that might give some immediate relief?
Yeah, low value tasks are often habitual. We get into habits. We look at email first thing in the morning. We look at social media on our lunch break. You know, we are accustomed to filling our days with meetings. And so people are resistant to lose these low value things because it's about changing a habit. And I always do this exercise when I speak and I tell people cross your leg. They cross the right leg over your left. Now cross again, your right leg over your left. Now try the left leg over the right. Feels awkward,
That
doesn't
feels
feel
weird.
natural.
Feels weird. I
Right,
just did it. It feels weird.
right. But now do it 3 or 4 times and make it a habit, and all of a sudden, it doesn't feel weird. It's doable. And so, really, if you just eliminate a couple of low value things, you're like, "I had time for a workout today. Wow, I really had time to prepare for my team meeting." "Wow, I had time to do the research or take a look at what the competitor's doing." And you start to feel that lift of you have time for things that are important, you'll go to the second thing on your list. And that's why I developed the busy barometer, because we are often the last people to realize and to understand what low value things we're doing on a habitual basis. And the busy barometer, I worked with HR executives and industrial psychologists to look at a person from every single angle and what contributes to workforce productivity and happiness and engagement and a sense of belonging. And a lot of it was about people just don't like spending their time doing things that have low value. Everybody wants to make a difference, and that's why subtraction, you can't add more into something that's already full. So you have to start by eliminating things so you have time, energy, resource to focus on what's important.
For the big companies you've worked with, I think you said you work with Google and like Bank of America. I imagine there's leaders there that say, hey, this is a high pressure environment. We're busy. How do you respond to something like that when you're like, no, you need to still figure out a way to eliminate low value tasks? Like, have you heard that resistance from leaders?
Normally, people will say, I'm busy, but there's no way out. And then I will say, try this for 2 days. Just try it, see how it feels. And all of a sudden, people start, those resistors, those people that, don't want to change their habits. One company I worked with in particular had a lot of meetings, and they insisted that meetings were really important. And most of their workforce was in meetings 82% of their workday. And they had no time to work, but that's not atypical, right? So I just said, okay, well, make sure when you go to a meeting that you have an agenda, make sure that you have a purpose, make sure that everybody there is a contributor. Don't go to a meeting if you don't add value or get value. That's your rule. And so people started having less meetings and they blocked out that time to actually get work done. And it's pretty great, crazy. People don't resist this process because it works. And everybody wants more time for the things that give them joy and that light them up and make them feel good. Even if you're a workaholic, you don't want to end your day feeling like you didn't move the mark, you didn't reach the finish line, you didn't get done what was most important and would really add value to the business and help grow the business.
There's a quote that I pulled out from your book. It says, we wear Fitbits or Apple Watches to measure our heart rate, oxygen consumption, calorie burn, and steps, yet none of these devices measure our busyness or our happiness, and it's critical to measure those as well. End quote. What's your solution to that problem? Because, I have a wearable. I love tracking. I love the data. But when it comes to my happiness level or my busyness level, I have no way of measuring this on a day-to-day basis, or even take a step back and look at it. What do you think?
Yeah. I'm a data geek. I'm a metric driven person. So everything I do has to be measurable in some way. And so for me, I mean, we spent a little bit of time talking about subtraction. So let's talk about this mojo making and the happiness. And we tend to think that happiness is this big thing that you need to work towards. It's a destination, it's a place, it's a thing. When I get a promotion, when I get married, when I get a house. But actually, science shows that happiness is in the micro moments, these small little joyous things that we do every day. I eat dark chocolate every day at 11 a.m. No matter where in the world I'm traveling, I pop 3 pieces of dark chocolate into my mouth, close my eyes. It's like pushing the reset button. And you do these happiness rituals a couple of times a day. You do them before you go to sleep. And they really are game changing in terms of elevating your mood, but also your ability to focus and get things done, eliminating chronic disease. So, so much of the processes that I push people towards or gently suggest, are all data driven to really end up with a high state of quality of life.
You talked about values vibing and aligning your time management, your busyness with your values. And how can somebody practically identify what their core values are, especially for those that haven't actually sat down and wrote their values?
Yeah,
But
it was interesting because I've written and spoken about values for a good portion of my career. And when I would ask people, what are your core values? People would look at their neighbors and kind of steal something from their neighbor, or they Google them. It just didn't seem to be something, that people readily knew. They knew they wanted to be honest, but you can be an honest person. It doesn't mean you have quality of life. So I got really curious as to what values lead to quality of life, a well lived life, a well done day. And I researched over 12,000 people to understand, what are the core things. And it came up that there are 4 things that really equate to quality of life. And of course, we all personalize them based on who we are and our experiences, but their energy, which is all about self-care and making sure you're eating and you're sleeping and that, you're in the right mood and you're positive. It's about connection and making sure that you're connecting enough with humans, not so much the email connection piece, but actually doing this and having a conversation. It's about growth. We all want to learn. We get endorphin hit when we learn something new. It feels good. My father used to say, Toots, a day without learning something new is a lost opportunity. And so, I agree with that. I try to learn something new every day and I make it a priority. And the last value that has really been interesting for me in teaching and the value that leads to quality of life is authenticity. And originally, when I would talk about authenticity, it was about having the courage to step into the things that are right for you and making the right decisions. But today, authenticity is really about being open minded and accepting that there are different solutions to every problem and that our differences make us better together. And, we should celebrate our differences and, not be so narrow thinking. And so authenticity is one of them. And it's really about just being open minded to doing things differently and pivoting and just, being change resilient.
you highlight some busy busting non-negotiables in the book. Can you highlight some of those?
Yeah, I know for me, I have to exercise every single day. When I exercise, it's a good day. I have less stress. I feel good. Every day, I like to spend half an hour of quality time with my cat. necessarily my husband, but my cat. I mean, it makes me feel so good when he purrs and he jumps in my lap and does things like that. And so they're things that really light me up. I spend time reprioritizing because many times the priorities that I thought I had or that I laid out or that I time blocked aren't really the things that are most important. And so, a non negotiable is I take a half an hour to organize my thoughts in my day and to rearrange it. And you get to know what your non negotiables are, and spending time with family, getting good night's sleep, blocking off time for the unexpected. For me, that's a non negotiable because it's going to happen every day. The unexpected is going to happen and it's going to chew up your day. So why not plan for it? Why not have, 90 minutes in your day for the unexpected? So when it does happen, you're not putting in an extra couple of hours, but you can actually deal with it. And so really discovering what your non-negotiables are and, how they add value to your quality of life.
When people inevitably buy your book, they go through the busy busting process. They learn some of these new skills to reduce the busyness that they feel. So they start to feel happier and more energy and all of the things that you're talking about. How do we hold ourselves accountable to these new skills and make sure we don't slip back into old habits?
Yeah. Well, as I started off the conversation saying, my name is Peggy and I am a busyness addict. And so for me, I didn't realize that I was an addict. And addiction is described from the American Psychiatrists Association as being something that takes away from what you want to do, what you need to do, what you should be doing. And busyness is just that. So I will just take a step back and I'll focus on the things I can control, and eliminating low value activities. That's something I can control. Doing things that bring me joy and happiness, even if it's just 3 minutes of lighting a candle, getting the sunshine on my face, whatever it is, it can be a micro moment, and micro moments add up. And, the reality is, I'm like in the last third of my life, and it took me the first two-thirds to make a lot of mistakes and to put myself second. I was highly successful. I traveled the world, had thousands of people reporting to me. I had a good life, but I wasn't happy and I wasn't healthy. And I didn't always have time for what was most important. I look at a post-it note to remind me what time zone, I was in. I mostly sleep on overseas flights. That would be when I get my good 8 or 12 hours. And how crazy is that? I'll tell you a funny story. One time I went to Singapore and it was an overnight flight, and I got there at 8 a.m. in the morning. So I just worked all day, right? Till the evening. We had events and that went on for many, many days. I'm finally ready to go home. And I'm like, yay, this is great. I'm going to sleep on the plane. And I go and I hunker down and I settle into my seat. And there are a bunch of sumo wrestlers. I kid you not, a wrestling team that boarded the plane. And these individuals were big fellas. And so they sat next to me, they lifted their armrests, they proceeded to totally squish me, on both sides. I had no room to move, and thinking like you're going to save your sleep and you're going to recharge and you'll be able to go from burnout to productivity is insane, because burnout, this slow thing that happens gradually, and you don't get out of burnout by one good night's sleep. And according to the statistics, 78% of the working population feels burnt out. So, we're not focusing on the things that we need to work at peak performance. And that's what it gets down to. When you eliminate busyness, your performance improves. It just does. And then you feel good about yourself and your contributions, and you're happier and you have more time for your family and your kids. And it's just this, I wrote this book because I really hope that we can get back to a society that just loves and cherishes the lives that we lead, and that we're kind to each other, and that we're productive, and that we thrive. And my process is so easy. It's so memorable. There's no excuse not to try it. And for people that are resistant, when they try one or two steps and they get some time back and then they get to do things they love or things that make them happy, they're like, yeah, this makes sense.
I appreciate you sharing and being so personal about your journey on this, and even that story about sleeping on the plane, and then ultimately that was your space to sleep, and you didn't get to because the sumo wrestlers were confined in your area. And so that what that teaches me is that for my calendar, I need to put space to sleep, to exercise, to go for walks, to journal, to read, to make time for the things that I find important and that's going to make me happy. Is that what you'd like to see for other people, not only individually but in the workplace too, just to improve our cultures?
I'm a big time blocker. I love to block out my time. So you'll look at my calendar and you'll see when I'm going to exercise December 13th, exactly what time, because it's blocked out. You'll see what time I have to deal with the unexpected. You'll see what time I have to strategize and to look at data. So I'm really big on setting myself up for success because, I have these blocks of times that I can dedicate to networking, that I can dedicate to family and friends, I can dedicate to exercise, instead of this, feeling like, oh my gosh, I need to be back to back to back to back. I can't think, I can't breathe. I, get to my end of my day and now my day begins because I finally have time to do what I should have been doing during the day. And so, it's this sort of self destructive behavior that we create for ourselves that we need to learn how to be more cognizant. And it's a process. There are some days where I don't mean to, and somebody will raise their hand and try to grab some time, or, I'll end up doing things and I'll be like, yeah, today was over the top busy, but I can do better tomorrow. What am I going to do differently? And it's a process, and it's just one micro step at a time.
Peggy's book, it's called Beyond Busyness: How to Achieve More by Doing Less. It's been out as of the end of January. It's a great book. Go get it. There's lots of exercises and other things that we didn't even touch on in this podcast interview today. Peggy, what do you want to leave people with, either as a thought or an action? And then feel free to point people to any of your work or connect with you.
Yeah, I mean, we spend a third of our time at the workplace. There is a way to make the workplace productive, happy, healthy, engaging, a little less stress. And so many times people just think about stress, or they think about everything that they have to do. And so my challenge to all leaders is it comes from the top. And if you show your people that you've got this under control and that you aren't a victim of time poverty, you actually create time wealth and have time for what's important, your people will follow because they'll see an example of somebody living life to its fullest potential. And I love talking about this. So I guess what I would say to anybody is reach out to me. I'm so happy to speak at schools, at colleges, in front of organizations, virtual, live, whatever it takes, because this process, it's changed my life and it's changed thousands of other busy people, and it can change your life too. And it's about a micro step. It's not about major transformation. So you got this. And go to my website, buy my book, go to Amazon, Beyond Busyness, Peggy Sullivan. And hopefully you'll have fun reading the book because it was meant to be very funny and very humorous and kind of laugh your butt off, but learn something along the way. And that's me in a nutshell. I love to have fun and I love to laugh and I love to play.
My guest today has been Peggy Sullivan, the author of Beyond Busyness. Peggy, thanks so much for coming on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, back at you.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Zenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Zenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.